So I just want to say hi. I'm James Pura. I am... Thank you. Thank you. I hope you're all having a good time at the conference so far. Welcome to the NewSpace 2010 Awards Gala. As I said, my name is James Pura, and I'm the Assistant Conference Chair of this year's conference. I hope you've enjoyed the programming so far. Me and the rest of the team, including Ryan McClinko and NASA Ames' own Bruce Pittman, yes, please. We've really tried to push the limits and get you the best programming that anyone's ever seen at this conference so far, or at any conference. Ever, of all time. Some speakers are old, some speakers are new. Oh wait, I don't mean old, I mean you've heard from them before. But either way, I hope it's been enjoyable. I hope you've all also taken notice of the representation at this year's conference from the younger generation. If not, take a look at the room around you now. You know, this NewSpace thing has really struck a chord in the hearts and minds of the best and brightest of the next generation of space nerds. So I would like to encourage all of you for the rest of this conference, if you find yourself standing next to a younger person and their eyes are glazed over with bewilderment but enthusiasm, you know, start a conversation with them. Tell them a story that maybe they've never heard before. I promise they'll enjoy it. I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsors, for without their help, we wouldn't be here. I'd like to thank first and foremost NASA. Yes, yes, and more specifically NASA Ames Research Center. Boeing has also been a support for us for many years, so I'd like to thank them as well for their continued support. Isle of Man has also been one of our strongest, most consistent supporters and has shared our vision for a while now, so thank you. I'd also like to thank Dynetics, Ecliptic, SpaceWorks Commercial, Mass and Space Systems, SEDS, National Space Society, Space.com, Space Vidcast, Space News, and InSpace Media. You see a theme here? So without further ado, I'd like to bring up the person who will introduce our first award, the NewSpace Journalism Award. Dave Brody is executive producer at Space.com and its parent company, Tech Media Network. He's a career television documentarian, science reporter, and technology commentator. And Dave's an advocate of the Space Frontier Foundation as well. Here to present tonight's award for NewSpace Journalism, Dave Brody.
Thank you, James. We've got some media that we want to set up for you. So I will call upon my media friends in the back to come and help me boot this up.
Apparently, I'm one of those old guys that he talked about. So I'll just sit here in the corner being very quiet. You won't hear a thing from me. Nothing, I promise.
And while we set this up, I'm trying to picture what bewilderment plus enthusiasm looks like. Is that about it? Is that what you were thinking, James? I don't know any. You know some jokes? So I'll tell you what we're trying to do here. Your NewSpace Journalism Award winner tonight is Miles O'Brien. He doesn't know that we've secretly put rocket fuel in his coffee. he, of course, is, as looking around the room, he's not with us tonight. He is in rural Georgia, in what he calls deliverance country, at his lake home, and we're going to try and Skype him in. So that's what's going on here. I'm going to let you do the honors.
All right, let's.
Hopefully we won't catch him, you know, in an awkward moment at his lake house in deliverance country. That would be a freeze of Miles O'Brien earlier in the day, because it's the middle of the night in deliverance country. It's Miles at the lake. Okay, well, so far this is working about as well as dessert. Nicely done. Did everyone hear the gentleman? Oh, well. Yes, we're pinging you. Do you see us? Ladies and gentlemen, Miles says, "My bad." Yeah, stand by. Call someone else. That's right. Uh-oh. Let's try one more time. We'll just keep trying until we get there.
This is exciting.
Have the technology!
Ladies and gentlemen, Big Miles is watching you. Hey, Miles, can you see the audience? I'm using a compact that I borrowed from a young lady.
Great. Hey, everybody.
All right. So there they are. It's like looking through the Soyuz port, right? All right.
How's the food?
Bit rubbery is the report that I heard. All right, so Miles, let me say some nice things about you. Just sit there and look pretty, you know. So I first met this character in a space context. I met him at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, that little, room with the blue curtain, that damn blue curtain where America's best and brightest and smartest and most interesting people are made to sit there very stiffly by NASA PAO. I mean, heaven forbid, like the CDR should have an opinion about the mission that he's going to fly or she's going to fly. So it was clear to me at that very moment that Miles was a kindred spirit with us here in the foundation. It was pretty obvious that Miles was there, and in fact I was there, not because our respective media organizations, in his case CNN, in my case Sci-Fi Channel, really wanted us to be there covering it. We were there because we were really into the subject, like space was, I don't know, important. So speaking of CNN, Miles was on air for 17 years there, eventually becoming the chief technology and environment talent. And in my humble opinion, CNN has no idea what they gave up when they gave up Miles O'Brien. But the good news is mainstream media's loss is our gain, because for the last several months, Miles, along with Stephen Young at Spaceflight Now and his team, with a little bit of help from space.com, has been producing this labor of love and personal passion that they call This Week in Space, and I encourage you to check it out wherever you can find it. Yes, it's on space.com, but it's also at spaceflightnow.com. It's on YouTube. Just Google it. It will come up. So, and one of the things, when This Week in Space is at its best, and this is just my personal opinion, Miles, it's when you're covering the cool, disruptive stuff that is done in the private commercial space sector. So, Miles, for your unmatched, insightful reporting on the new space industry and the old space industry, we of the Space Frontier Foundation are honored and pleased to present you with the 2010 NewSpace Journalism Award. I'll show it to you, and then please talk to our folks here.
You like me. So, thank you 1,000 times. Thank you. It's been a wild ride for me since I left that big mainstream media network that I work for. It's interesting. I've always I've had such a passion for this subject, and for the longest time, I spent most of my time trying to convince the gatekeepers at CNN to allow me to tell the story a little more than they really wanted to hear it. Basically, they would send me down to the Cape to cover what I call death watch journalism, just to be there just in case it blows up. And it really didn't matter to them what the mission was all about and what the crew was doing. And that was truly frustrating to me. So, when I left, when they shoved me out the door at CNN, actually, I was worried about those of us who care about this subject. And, I feel very committed and very passionate about passing on our passion to another generation, to my kids, who didn't have the benefit of growing up and witnessing the moon race and Apollo. And I was concerned about that. And I quickly realized that the coverage that I was doing on the mainstream media at CNN was doing nothing to inspire them or engage them. And so, to use an analogy which is apt here, I got booted out of my cost-plus contract, and I became a commercial space player.
All right.
And I like it. I like it a lot because suddenly I find myself in a situation where I'm a lot more nimble and I'm a lot cheaper, and I am able to cover, I like to call it coverage that is, an inch wide and 50 miles deep, which is just the opposite of what I did for 17 years at CNN. And so it's actually a wonderful privilege to be in a situation where I'm covering a story which is at a great inflection point, and despite all the stuff that's going on in Washington and all the talk about not space but jobs in Alabama, which is really frustrating, but unfortunately part of our messy little thing called democracy. In spite of all that, I'm really very optimistic about where we are and where we're headed. And I wish that the Obama administration had done a better job messaging how exciting all of this is and how much it portends and how cool it's going to be when we all get a chance to go. Or certainly 500 people in the first 50 years of space flight is not enough. It should be 500 a week. So to be a part of that is, and I really, I'm committed to it. We've done this show on less than a shoestring and loved every minute of it, and we wouldn't stop no matter what because this is too important. And so thank you for accept this on behalf of Kate Tobin, Waters, this together because we love it and care deeply about this subject. And here's chronicling an event where we all get to participate. Thank you very much.
Well, Miles, our audio link may be falling apart, but we're going to try something real quick. Let's see if it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. We're going to try and turn the tables on you a little bit. You're usually the guy who's asking the questions. We thought we would take this opportunity to ask the asker. So, covering as you do the space scene, I'm struck, and a couple other people around here are struck by the stark contrast right now between the utter chaos that's going on in Washington and the amazing clarity that's going on in the private commercial new space arena. What do you think of what's going on inside of the Beltway and outside of the Beltway as a guy with his pulse on, or with his finger on what's going on in the general public? How do you think it's playing out there? So inside Washington, how's it getting out? What do you think?
Well, you know, I'd say it was a parallel universe, but sometimes I think it's a perpendicular universe in Washington. What goes on there, I think, has very little to do with what is going on in the field. I just, this past week, I had the opportunity finally to tour SpaceX and Hawthorne. And I know you've been there, David. It's such an impressive place. They bring in the raw materials, bend them, weld them, and out comes a Merlin engine and a Dragon 9 capsule at the other end. It's incredibly impressive. And this is the same place that people in Washington describe the operation as. So anybody who's been there knows these people are not hot. That's the furthest thing from the truth. So I hope that over time, as the flights become more real, and we all get a chance to cover them, and people hopefully become enthused with what is happening, I hope this will turn the focus, change the debate a bit. In the meantime, we're talking about jobs, and until that settles out, kind of bogged down in classic Washington, which has nothing to do with space exploration. And the sooner we move away from that, the sooner we're going to move away from this planet.
All right. See them applauding? That's applause for you. Well, thank you so much, Miles. And one more round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.
So my wife would have killed me. The beauty of new media is I can sit here with this shirt on and I'm wearing boxers.
You mean rather like a Supreme Court justice? Thank you very much, Miles. Folks, your 2010 NewSpace Journalism Award winner, Miles O'Brien. All right, and by Miles. So now I'd like to call forward the founders of our Space Frontier Foundation, Mr. Bob Werb, Mr. Jim Munsey, and Mr. Rick Norman Tumlinson. Someone go to the men's room and fetch Rick.
He'll get here. He'll figure it out. He'll be bemused. So I take it this is the Founders Award? Oh, good, great. So, what do we want to say about this?
I don't know.
Okay. There he is. Now I'm inspired.
What happened?
You were here.
I didn't do it. It's not my fault.
You weren't here.
Okay.
That's okay. You're here now. So we founded this organization 22 years ago. Okay? And it always amazes me we still talk to each other. At least once a year, right? Here we are.
No politics, though.
The Founders Award, we created it, I don't know, about 10 years ago, as an award for us, the founders, okay? To recognize someone who was making a contribution above and beyond anything we could ever expect or ask for to the foundation, to the Space Frontier movement, to the community. And we're making it possible for the organization to succeed in its goals. We've given the award to people like Walt Anderson for his financial generosity and his support of our organization many times over the years. David Webb, Jerry O'Neill, through his son Edward, and many other people. For the first time this year, we're actually going to give this award to someone who has given her life to space advocacy, and in particular is fighting the fight for our vision that we share with her in Washington, D.C., and believe me, is suffering the slings and arrows of fairly outrageous attack for actually helping to change things for the better. Inside of NASA. I've known Lori Garver for 27 or 26 years. When I met her, she had just left the John Glenn for President campaign and had joined the National Space Institute staff. And we've been friends for a very long time. You know, a lot of us were involved in the L5 Society before it merged and became the National Space Society. And so we go back. And when Lori left at the end of the Clinton administration, I sat down with her, took her to lunch, and told her what space policy consultants did. And she got into the business and did a lot better than I did. Anyways, Lori is in Europe right now on work for NASA, but she filmed a video for us, and somebody better know how to start this because I have no clue. And if they aren't up here soon, what? You're ready? You can do it back there? Wow, there she is. So
Whoa, can't hear.
Can you start it? And
Restart.
Bob, Rick, and Jim, your vision, drive, and spirit are an inspiration to me. So it's an incredible honor to receive an award from you. It's been your work and that of the Foundation that has advanced our nation and our world toward a time when humans living and working beyond Earth is a reality. I know that we're doing that now with the astronauts on the International Space Station, but I also know that what you are working toward is a time when not all of the people living and working in space are paid for by the taxpayer. This award is meaningful because it comes from the space community's true believers. You are the visionary change agents, and I grew up with you. It's a somewhat ironic situation that when the Space Frontier Foundation was founded, I was executive director of the National Space Society, and it was partly in response to NSS's close relationships with NASA and industry that the founders felt a void that should be filled and started the foundation. At least, I remember that's the way Rick explained it to me at the time. Rick and I discussed at that time how NSS could be the Sierra Club of the space movement, and the Space Frontier Foundation could be Greenpeace. I'm sure we were both thinking that we would take their membership numbers any day. So maybe this is like Greenpeace giving an award to the deputy of EPA, but if so, I'll take it. We may not always agree on tactics. I'm not sure what your equivalent is to the RAF stopping the whaling ships, and I'm not sure I want to know. But the result has been the same. We have a broad recognition of the importance of meaningful space development. The world has changed since that time 20 years ago, when many of us were focused on direct mail and membership numbers. The foundation has done an incredible job of evolving with the times and taking advantage of that change to shift the debate, and I would even argue the culture of space development. I know you are the furry mammals. For over 2 decades, the Space Frontier Foundation has championed the vision of Gerard O'Neill and others for permanent human settlements in space. You have led the fight for policies and programs that will open the space frontier for commerce, science, and people everywhere. So, as a government employee responsible for providing only a small piece of that vision, I'm proud to be considered among your distinguished group of foundationeers. I'm doing what I can to align the NASA programs to allow for this ultimate vision. We know that the government's role is to invest in R&D to advance the time when the private sector can play a greater role in space activities. We know that it is our job to press the exploration envelope to, as you say, the far frontier, allowing the private sector to take advantage of our past investment and open new markets. We know that it is our job to help buy down not only the technical risk, but the market risk. And we know that sometimes it is our job to simply get out of the way and not compete with the private sector. So that as a nation we can tap the very innovative spirit that has led to economic growth that capitalist societies rely upon. And why do we know all this? We, or I, learned it from you. I don't know who all is there, but I can only imagine how many of you have been part of this past few decades of discussion on these very topics. What is most impressive to me is that you have consistently carried this critical message of space development into so many areas, to policy, legislation, press relations, and political action. You are truly the thought leaders on this topic and have never wavered from your goals. As you know, I live in Washington, D.C., and that is, in fact, impressive. I know you are aware of this, but what started out 20 years ago as crazy talk is now accepted national policy and is the very underpinnings of the President's 2011 budget request for NASA. President Obama said in April, "Our goal is the capacity for people to work and learn and operate and live safely beyond the Earth for extended periods of time, ultimately in ways that are more sustainable and even indefinite." You can be as proud of those words as I am. The President's budget proposal at its core supports opening the space frontier and pursuing the ultimate goal of human settlement. He has given us a wonderful, visionary blueprint and the resources to go with it to achieve this objective. In the coming decades, a strong space industry transporting crew and cargo to and from low Earth orbit with many new jobs and industries is going to help drive our economy and provide more access to space worldwide. You've been advocating this for more than a decade, and at NASA, we're doing everything in our power to make it a reality. We're closer to some of our big objectives than we have ever been. We're taking steps to develop and fly the technologies we will need to explore an amazing array of destinations and to give future generations far more capabilities than we have today. That today we are having a discussion about how to do this, not if we should at all, are thanks in large part to the efforts of your passion and tenacity. I know you will not be disheartened that there are challenges along the way and that progress is not as fast as we would like. I do wish that I could be with you in person this weekend. I promise that I have been putting in the hours over the last year, but as many of you know, Dave and I got married on Space Day, July 20th. That was 24 years ago this week, and we're on vacation without the kids, who, by the way, are 15 and 18. Shocking, I know, to many of you who remember before and when they were born. But this award will help me get through the tough times when things are not going as fast as I would like to remember that I work for citizens like you who appreciate our efforts. So together, we will open the space frontier, and thank you again for this honor.
think you need to go to the next slide. There we go. And I need Michael Potter to join me up here. But tonight, this is not Michael Potter of Orphans of Apollo. This is Michael Potter of Isle of Man. I didn't know that about you, but and he's here this evening representing the Isle of Man. Could I have the next? Whoa! Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, there we go. The Pioneer of NewSpace Award is given to early leaders in the creation of commercial space industry who have left a lasting legacy, either through their own personal investment or the creation of an early new space business enterprise. Art Doehler has been a leader in space for years and is the ultimate new space pioneer, and he's not done yet. We can all hope that he remains an important player in the new space community for many years to come, because after all, he's only a few years older than me. And yes, we are old men. And Mike.
Thank you so much.
Next slide, please.
So as Bob mentioned, I've been deputized by the Isle of Man for 12 hours to be the official Isle of Man representative to grant this honor. And the first thing is that when we look at Pioneers of Space, we're really looking at the legacy of firsts. And when you talk about Art Doehler, it's incomprehensible how many firsts that Art has ushered into the planet. It's startling. And the amazing thing is when Art talks about it, he's so folksy and so casual that it's to the average listener, we can't really comprehend exactly what's taking place. But in 1982, he was the first person to be approved for a private rocket launch. So that was back in 1982, a real pioneer. In 1987, he had the first approval to sell a proton launch to a commercial business, which is also an extraordinary feat. And Art has done innumerable things, and that's also the challenge when you deal with Art. I mean, literally, Who's has now been obsolete because of the internet, but really, Art needs several pages to as an introduction to his resume. But the first thing is he's on the board of trustees. He's a trustee of the Heinlein Prize Foundation, and really a curator for Heinlein's works. And he has been awarded over 100 patents. I have gotten over 100 patents for other people. Right. So he's So see, this is what makes Art so difficult to deal with, is because he's being modest. Because Art has had a number of equity positions in companies that are patent holders of patents that he's also obtained. So, but Art has been passionate. He's been a technologist all his life. It's part of Art's DNA. Also, Art is on the board of trustees of the International Space University, and I have to tell you that Art became a board member at a very critical time of the Space University's life. And I have to tell you that really, if it was not for 2 or 3 people, and Art being probably one of the most pivotal people, at this one moment, when some French banks arbitrarily took away a credit line that had been in existence for many, many years. And Art had the determination, he had the passion, and he had the vision of trying to make sure that the Space University could continue with an amazing vision and amazing continuity of what it had always done. Art stepped up and delivered the goods, and people are grateful for that. And Art remains today on the board of trustees of the International Space University. So if we can go to the next slide. So I can just tell you from a personal point of view that it was 22 years ago that I had the pleasure of meeting Art. And we were just probably maybe 50 meters away from the Infinite Corridor at MIT University, and it was the inaugural session of the International Space University. And to put it in the full context, you have to remember in 1988, it was still in the middle of the Cold War, And it was right before the International Space University was supposed to be started. And nobody knew. Nobody knew whether the Soviet delegation was going to be granted its visas. Nobody knew whether the Chinese delegation was going to be granted its visas. And this miracle took place, the International Space University. And Art showed up, and Art gave a lecture about this amazing new field called the commercialization of space. And you have to remember, in the middle of the Cold War, when every space agency had the monopoly on outer space, the Challenger disaster had already taken place. There was no flights on the space shuttle, and the International Space Station didn't exist. And Art Dula walked into a classroom at MIT and said, you know, there's a new vision I have for space. I know it's the Cold War, but I've signed an agreement with the Soviet Union, and I'm going to sell Proton launch vehicles to the West. And I can do it safer, I can do it in a more consistent way, and I can do it at a lower cost to taxpayers, and I'm open for business, I'm ready to go. And I have to tell you, you know, everybody has a story about how somebody, where they were at a university, and somebody got up and somebody spoke, and it touched them in some way. But I have to tell you that for many, many of the students who listened in that audience, and for 98% of all the speakers who came through the International Space University, they either represented NASA or the European Space Agency or JAXA. So they were all well-intentioned people, all incredibly intelligent people, but there was no diversity of opinion about how do you try to solve the world's problem. And so there was this vision that people talked about when people came in from NASA. They said, hey, we got this great idea. For $15 billion, we want to create an international space station. People said, why $15 billion? Why does it have to be $15 billion? And they said, yeah, this is the number that it has to be. If you look on Wikipedia today, and you look at the largest estimate for the International Space University, $150 billion fully loaded. $150 billion. That includes all of JAXA's money, all of NASA's money, all of the Russian money that went into it. So there's a small group of fringe radical students who wanted a different, fresh perspective. So we cornered Art Dula, and we said, look, Art, this is great that you have this agreement with Proton Launch, and if we were just trying to do things a little bit more efficiently, is it possible that we could do it for less than $15 billion? And Art said, look, I can get you a launch. The launch is the simple part of it. But we said if we wanted to be really ambitious and we wanted to fully load all the costs on this, we could probably do this for probably $500 million. That was $500 million. And Art said that in 1988, and the International Space Station was built in the year 2000. And now, as we speak, right now in 2010, it's been $150 billion fully loaded. But I have to tell you, one of the things, when somebody is a pioneer in the new space movement, it really is a reflection of all the first that they've done. And if you talk about the 100 patents or all the companies that Art has been associated with, Space Commerce and Space Hab and all the companies, he's a founder of the Almaz project, which is trying to commercialize the former Soviet space assets. You look at all those first, and by definition, Art is one of the founding fathers of the space industry. But to be a founding father of the commercial space industry, it's not enough. Yeah, you can own a company, you can run a company. It's not enough to have leadership. I think it's also important to have a spirit, and there's an ethic that goes along with that. And I think Art delivers that, and we salute you, we celebrate you, and thank you, Art.
I'm often asked, a big part of my job as chairman of the foundation is kind of intake of young people, and one of the questions that they often ask me is, what is this new space thing? How do you define it? And I have to admit, of course, that there is no generally accepted definition of new space. Different people define it in different ways. But I tell them, to me, what new space is, it's about transformation. And, I think most of you know that new space has the power to transform the way we do things both here on Earth and in space. And you certainly know that it has the power to transform companies and perhaps even whole nations. And I think ultimately, you know that it has the power to transform our entire civilization into a spacefaring civilization. But I bet you didn't know that it had the power to turn this guy into the guy on the next slide. And it is with great pleasure that I give Art Dula this year's Pioneer of New Space Award.
Thanks. I get to talk now, right?
Yes.
You know, as a lawyer, I like to talk. How the hell am I supposed to get this thing into my suitcase?
We'll ship it for you.
Yeah, look, hey, Red, could you take this and set it on the table?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate this because most of the time I'm handing out the awards. Like, for example, we gave Peter Demianis the Heinlein Prize, which had a check for $500,000 with it, and I don't see any check tonight, unfortunately. Yeah, I got the rock. What you don't know is when I gave Peter that check, I was kind of nervous when I wrote it, and I accidentally post-dated it by a year. And no, this is a true story now. Listen now, this is a true story. And so he had this check for $500,000, and he didn't notice it because he was so excited. We'd given him a sword, too, and he was waving the sword around and poking people with it. But he got back to California, and his bookkeeper noticed that it was dated 1 year later, and so I got this very diffident phone call from Peter. Art, did you realize that you actually dated the check 1 year later, and was this intentional? And I said, oh, no, it's all right, don't worry. We'll cancel it, and we'll do another check. And at that point, he was relieved, and he went back to being the ordinary Peter that founded all of these things. And he said, well, can I keep that one and cash it next year? And now, if you want to define new space, that's an operational definition of new space. Let me talk to you for about 5 minutes about some interesting things that happened on the way to making some companies make some money. And then I'll tell you why at least I'm actually here. And I'd like to share that with you because I think it's important. Yes, in 1982, I got the first license to launch a private space vehicle for Space Services Incorporated, my friends in Texas. We launched the Conestoga to 250 miles over the Gulf of Mexico. And the State Department said we had to have an export license because we were exporting a bunch of sand into the Gulf of Mexico. And we told them that, you know, essentially, screw you, we're going to launch the thing. And 24 hours before we launched, we got a one-time exemption from the law, bless their hearts. I can remember we didn't have a radar tracking system, and we needed to use the Corpus Christi Naval Air radar tracking that they use for training people out there over the Gulf. And we were on the line with this admiral and his general counsel, and they said, well, sometimes the Cubans run intelligence trawlers into that area, and what happens if you hit one of them? And I looked around and thought, well, what the hell am I supposed to say about that? And so finally I said, well, Admiral, I'm awful sorry. We don't have time to fit terminal guidance onto this thing, but we'll sure try to hit that intelligence trawler. and he gave us the okay to use his radars at that point. Now, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and there wasn't any space licensing procedure there. That came along 2 years later because we did this. And so I had to get licenses from 32 separate places, and one of them was the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who noticed that we had more than 3.5 ounces of black powder in this Minuteman M1 motor that we were firing into space. So I'm the only person in the world that has a federal firearms license for an intermediate range ballistic missile. Now, I should mention that we had one of the strangest countdowns in all of history because we were launching off of Todd Ely Wynn's farm, and there was an alligator that lived in the cooling pond. We had to spray water over the structure to keep it from melting, and it was an endangered species. So somebody had to go out with a bunch of chicken wings and drop it in front of the alligator, and the alligator we called Harvey would come out of the pond and follow the chicken wings, and we'd say, "You've got alligator clearance." So we were the only people who ever had to take and get alligator clearance to launch. Now, working with the Russians, that's also really interesting. For example, I've got a company right now that's Excalibur Almaz. We're going to take some Russian space capsules and put some Western technology in them, and that gives us a technical readiness level that's really good, and we're going to launch them, and we're going to make money. But when I first started working with the Russians, I got a contract for the Proton rocket, and I'll just tell you the secrets. I bought them for $20 million, and I sold them to Hughes for $23 million. It took 3 weeks to do that, and I thought that was a pretty good flip, you know, $3 million. And, you know, Hughes thought they could get the export license for the satellite because they had, you know, they knew Reagan. And I said, that's fine, you go do that. And so later on, they called up and said, all right, we sent you the money. They had, it was in my bank account. And they said, we can't get the license. Send us our money back. And I said, hey, did you read the contract you signed? You don't get all the money back. And so that's how I made the first profit, is I essentially I stole it from Hughes. And then I went to the Russians, who were my buddies, and they were all dejected because here we'd done all this work and they couldn't get we couldn't get the license. And they said, that's too bad. And they said, it's really horrible. And I said, well, you know, here's a check for $500,000. And they said, but we didn't do anything. And I said, well, did you read your contract? You make money if I make money. You don't have to do anything. You just have to sign a good contract. And I'm pleased to say that that got me into every Rolodex in the Soviet Union. And after and I told my wife, Tammy, who's sitting here with our 2 boys, that we had a bird's nest on the ground here because we had the exclusive right for the output of the Soviet Union to take and make these guys into capitalists and to sell their space hardware. And I said, honey, there's only one risk, and that's that the Soviet Union disintegrates and communism stops working. And God destroyed the Soviet Union to keep me from making that profit. So now I should tell you that I just got back from negotiating with the Chinese, so we'll see how that goes. Now, so having told you some of those interesting things, I'll just tell one more. Alex, you're here, aren't you, Alex Hall? You stand up for a minute. Now stand up. This lady bought a Thor Able rocket from me. And she did, but she said, Art, you got to deliver it to England. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get the U.S. government to give you an export license to export a ballistic missile privately as a private citizen? But we did it. And we got one, and so I wanted to repaint it so Alex would have a really good rocket for the British National Space Center. And in the middle of the repainting, somebody noticed that it was a giant rocket and called the FBI. And since when they typed the serial number in, it said that this was a nuclear-capable vehicle, the nuclear response team responded. And things got just a little tense there for a few minutes. But we had all of the export licenses. We had what the Department of Defense Trade Control calls a validated export license. And we were able to show that to them, and they went away. Now, I shipped it to England, and how the hell Alex got it from the port into the middle of England when this rocket is 90 feet long and their roads are about 4 feet wide, I don't know. They had to build a building around it, but you can go see it in England now. Okay, but that's the fun part. Let me tell you, and I could tell you some stuff about SpaceAb too, only they're still in business, so they sue me. I want to tell you why we're here, why I'm here anyway. I'm here because about 85% of the human race lives on about $5 a day. And that is just not sustainable. We're sitting here eating, really good beef, and we're drinking good wine, and they're starving to death. Now, that can't be allowed to continue. Yet, we only have a certain amount of resources on this planet. And according to the World Watch Institute, about 10 years ago, we passed the point that we could sustain everybody with the resources of just one planet. Fortunately, there are others. Now, I'm a Texan. I happen to like hydrocarbons. I mean, Texas has done right well out of hydrocarbons, and we plan to keep doing so. Of course, we've got a little bit going into the Gulf now, but that's just a little bit. Most of it we sell to everybody. Now, do you know where the biggest undeveloped deposit of hydrocarbons is? It's on Titan. It's on Titan. And for what we put into Iraq, we could have gone and gotten it. So, let me take 2 minutes now to expand to the big picture and tell you why we're doing this. We're doing this so that the person who can develop the warp engine, who's currently starving to death in Central Africa as a small child, can grow up and get an education and can take and, build warp drives for us. We need to take and use all of our brain power, and we can't do it if 85% of the world goes to bed hungry and ignorant. And if we take and continue to slice up the resources that we have here on this planet, we have to use very sharp knives to cut such small pieces. Now, I'm into the business of building bakeries and building more pies. And let me tell you how we're going to do it. In 2008, the world used 1,000 million metric tons of steel. That's a fact. And we're going to use that much next year and the year after and the year after. That's worth about $400 billion, and we're running out of iron ore. The price of iron ore has doubled in the last 5 years, and China's out all over Africa and South America competing with everybody to buy it because they're desperate for these resources. When I give this talk in Beijing, they pull out their notebooks and start taking notes when I tell them we can get iron and nickel and electricity from space because they didn't know it. There's a single asteroid called Apophis that's 2 kilometers across, which is about the size of a decent open pit mine, that's made out of nickel iron. We can go get it. We can bring it back here. We can land it here, and you can go today to the City of London and get a contract to deliver 100 million metric tons of steel on 10 to 15-year delivery. You can take that contract and you can back calculate the current value, taking away risk, taking away time value of money, and then maybe cutting it by 3/4 to give somebody a little bit of profit. I buy for 1, I sell for 4, I make my 3%. Now, we can do that just as easily for the steel in this, as Al Gore might say, this inconvenient location, as we could drilling for oil under the North Sea, which, believe me, is impossible. But we do it because we need the resources. I'm particularly glad to get this award and brought my family here. And I wouldn't do that just for any award, but for your award I will, because you're the people that are actually going to go do it, that are actually going to go get this steel from space, that are going to get the electricity from space. And in doing that, you will enrich the world. Look, there are 3 principal arguments made for going into space. There is the technological argument that we're going to learn all about the universe. We're going to learn all about science and technology. There's the economic argument. We're going to get rich, and yeah, we are going to get rich from it. And there's the military national defense argument. He who holds the high ground controls the earth, and whoever controls the orbitals controls the earth. Believe me, that is true. But all of those reasons have people that can argue against them. Oh, let's spend the money here. Let's not militarize space. Let's take and just do science from the ground. Why don't we cut them off at the knees and say the reason we're going into space is because it's a basic human biological drive. We're going into space for evolutionary reasons, not just for those excuses that I just gave you. Okay. That's the why we're doing it, which is what I wanted to share with you. So thank you very much tonight. I appreciate it. I hope I haven't taken too long.
I could have the next slide, please. Yes, and the next presentation is coming from Will Watson, who I've had a lot of employees over the years, and I want you to know that I've never had one who's as enthusiastic as Will, and it's been a pleasure having him work for me the last couple of years.
So I don't know if you've had a chance to visit spacevidcast.com on your iPad or perhaps a laptop if you're not lucky enough to have one yet, Jim. But those of that know me know that I tend to run late, and it was very nice to not miss Rick's speech this morning and instead be watching on my iPad. And now I'm watching myself. So, so to get to the point of this award, I met Ben 2 years ago, and Ben Higginbotham, and he told me he had this vision for allowing people that perhaps aren't lucky enough to go to these space conferences and meet people that are trying to open the frontier to have a chance to see what's going on and to perhaps be enticed to come and meet people in person that are doing these things. So, well, he managed to do that, and I'm really proud that he has accomplished this vision of his. Now, let me get to my speech. Switch from the video. So the award is reserved for nonfiction efforts such as documentaries and other projects that inform and enlighten the public about space exploration and development. The best presentation of space has gone to many other organizations in the past and projects. The space industry is notorious for failing to communicate exciting, hard-earned miracles to the general public. The space enthusiasts behind spacevidcast.com have successfully challenged this notion by creating an interactive video portal capable of virtually transporting people around the world to the factories and launch pads of new space rockets. This site makes the past and current events of space exploration accessible to anyone with internet access. Streaming events and interviews, spacevidcast.com reaches out and inspires a huge audience of armchair enthusiasts and space professionals. So without further delay, I'd like to bring Ben up from the back. Ben? What about Carrie Ann? Behind every great man is a woman.
You'll all be on later.
There you go. Thank you. Hang out like this. That's like the old Spice Man guy pose. Like, hello, ladies. How are you? Thank you.
Fantastic.
I'll turn this one off. Are you still recording?
Yeah, I'm gonna just record.
See, what a great perspective this is going to be, because how often do you get to see it from this side, right? And that's what we like to show. We like to show the other side. We like to show the stuff that maybe you didn't get to see before. I'll tell the story of how we got started. Yeah, exactly. Of how we got. And by the way, I have the live chat room right here.
I'm sure they're making fun of us right now.
And they are. And I'll refer back. No, actually, they really are.
Hi, Pete.
Some people may have heard this story before, but for those who haven't, we started about 3.5 years ago, and I was doing a technology podcast, and there's some stuff happened there, and I owned all the gear for this stuff, and we had to stop doing the tech podcast. And Carrie Ann and I used to do this tech podcast together. I turned to her and I said, I want to do another one. I want to do one on space. And she said,
That's stupid. You won't have anything to talk about. At least technology, there's something new every single day. Space is like, you'll have 3 weeks worth of content and there'll be nothing. That's dumb. Let's talk about Lost instead.
Yeah. No, that's what happened. And so she said, in 3 weeks when you're done, you come back and we'll do a real show, I think is what she said. And so I did Space Vidcast episode 001, right after, I think it was STS 123 or something like that.
Something like that.
And
it was terrible.
So bad that she came to me like an hour later and said, okay, no.
You need me.
You need me. And she's been with me ever since. And she has.
I have to. I've got the ring. It's not fair. It's different. It's not the same.
It hasn't been easy, but
I love you.
But that's because sometimes Carrie Ann wasn't a space geek. I was, and actually the story goes I was a space geek as a kid, and when I got into we'll call it high school or so, I whatever that spark was, whatever that was that got me excited about being an astronaut, was gone. I didn't care anymore. I don't know if I was disillusioned or what the story was. But then I heard about the space shuttle program retiring, and I started getting interested in some of the really cool new space stuff that was going on. This was a chance when maybe I actually can go to space. Maybe this is actually real, and that something lit back up inside of me. And I felt this, and I'm like, we need to share this with everyone. This is something that everyone needs to get reinvigorated about. And that's how Space Vidcast was born, because I said, this is something we need to do. And I look at Mass and Space Systems, and I say, you know what? They're doing some freaking cool stuff in Mojave. Why is no one showing this? This should be done live, because you want to see it explode. Let's be frank. You want to see it. You want to see it explode. That's what you want to see. I know I do.
Continue to disappoint.
Yes, you do.
And, that's where we come from, and that's what we continue to strive to do. And I do want to correct one minor thing, in that while I am honored, it isn't me, and it's not Carrie Ann, it's the entire community of new spacers and I don't want to use the term old space, we'll call it established space.
There you go.
Because, frankly, everyone needs everyone else. And it's everyone combined that has built a tremendous community, and we're all working for the same goal. We may disagree on how we get to that goal, but all of us want to go to space. And so we're just trying to find a different way to edutain the masses and make this happen, and we are humbled that you selected us for this, so thank you very much.
Really, thank you. Steal it before they ask for it back.
That is true.
And here to introduce the Vision of the Future Award is Rick Tomlinson. Next slide, please. Thank you.
I just, again, this team that's been running this conference, they ran it last year. They weren't institutionalized afterwards, which is what usually happens, which shows they have a lack of taste and extremely thick skins, and they're back running again this year. I just want to thank these guys, Ryan, all the volunteers, ladies, all of you, awesome. And as they've told us in the board meeting, get ready for it to, we're going to go wild next year. It's just going to, we're going to really go much larger. And just a quick side note, I'm so glad to see Art here. When I was a college dropout and looking for a way to get involved in space, and I couldn't figure out how I could do it because I cut all my science classes up in Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches, Texas. I was working in Dallas for a cosmetics company, and I was able to wangle some cameras. And I actually worked for Art at the Houston 05 conference and met a guy named Dave Brody. And the story we'll tell you in the party room later, got my ass chewed out by a guy named Robert Heinlein in front of, we won't go there. But it's so great to see you. I'm just so honored that you're here. You have to be able to visualize the future if you're going to achieve it. You have to be able to see that dream. Sometimes the vision of the future is a warning sign. Sometimes it is an attraction that says, come to me. Sometimes it's a combination of both. The Vision of the Future Award that the foundation gives is designed in a way to take into account both sides of that. Somebody we were talking earlier was joking that in this film, Moon, that there's an evil corporation. Well, it's fiction, folks. And of course, we know that corporations aren't evil. We know they're all good. And but anyway, the point is that you have to have a dramatic element. You've either got an evil corporation, an evil event, an evil alien, an evil mother-in-law, something has got to make the story work. So we forgive that. We have a tendency to move away a little bit from the alien side. But we understand that these are fictional works and they have to have that kind of thing in them. Now, the Vision of the Future Award, just to give you the technical element here, has been given for over 15 years by the foundation. It's previously gone to such projects as Babylon 5, the motion picture Star Trek, and we do understand that conflict and drama are the tools of storytelling. It doesn't have to necessarily be positive in its message, so long as the science, the setting, and the culture are somewhat realistic projections of today. In other words, what we used to call hard SF, something that could be reasonably projected forward. For example, Star Wars wouldn't qualify. It's a galaxy far, far away. Although once in a while I do feel the farce. The award is for us also. One of the original reasons we did this, just to take you behind the curtain a little bit, one of the reasons we did it was we thought, space people are impressed by Hollywood people, and Hollywood people are impressed by space people. And we put them on the stage together, some cool stuff might happen. And it's actually been that way all along. Everybody learns. Everybody gets better at what they're doing. Everybody gets excited. This particular film was really interesting to me. I have to say, we had a close second. It's some tiny, I can't even remember, Avatar is the close second to this film. And Jim Cameron, by the way, is a friend of the movement. But the vote, which was done by the advocates, went to this film, Moon. I have to admit, at the time of the vote, I hadn't seen the film, so I kind of pulled back and said, okay. Then, thanks to James, got me a copy, and I did see it, and I was blown away. Some of us have had the privilege and honor in our life of meeting Arthur C. Clarke, Sir Arthur, Uncle Arthur, as we call him. I'll tell you, Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, the great gods of our field, would have appreciated this film. This is a well-made film. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It does deal with some of the major cultural questions coming at us in the future. It does deal with it in a realistic or realistically projectable way. It does it in a very entertaining way. And I just thought it was incredible. I thought it was a great film. So, the Vision of the Future Film Award this year goes to the movie Moon. Here to accept the award, and we're very honored that he came this way to see us, is the director of the film, Duncan Jones. Sir?
Thank you.
By the way, Kevin Spacey's in the film too, but he'll tell you about that. Oh, well, I'll take it back.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is absolutely a huge honor for me. Moon's been a labor of love for me. We've been working on it. We were working on it for years to get it made and to try and find a way to finance it. It's a small British independent film. So I'm sorry I'm not James Cameron. Unfortunately, I didn't have $200 million to make my film either. We did it for about $5 million, which is maybe a fitting metaphor for the differences, I think, between sort of government-run space exploration and what I think the people in this room are interested in, which is finding a way to privately and independently get into space. For those who haven't seen Moon, it's about a mining facility on the Moon, mining helium-3 to ship back to Earth. It's run by a company called Lunar Industries, which is not necessarily an evil corporation, but they do have motives, profit motives. They have shareholders who they have to make sure that they look to, and they find themselves cutting corners. And unfortunately, the lone lighthouse keeper based on the Moon, a guy called Sam Bell, is one of those corners who finds himself cut when he's working on the far side of the Moon. We found ourselves, because of the budget of our film, having to use techniques and technologies which probably haven't been used since the 70s. We used a lot of model miniatures. Avatar is really sort of the antithesis of what we are. And Avatar was made using CG and shot against green screen. We were building small vehicles and actually pulling them across piles of flour, gray-painted flour, in order to simulate being on the surface of the Moon. Yeah, you can see a couple of our models up there. This was all done at a studio at Shepperton in England. It's funny, actually, the very first public audience that I had for Moon was in Houston, Texas, at the NASA Space Center. So it's it's lovely for me that the sort of the circle has fulfilled itself, and my last sort of public opportunity to talk about Moon is to this audience here. So from NASA to here. Thank you so much for the award, and thanks to Rick, who's given me an idea for another film at dinner tonight. So I appreciate that, and to James as well, who was able to get me to come up here. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
And now for the final award of the evening. If one of my very capable volunteers could do me a favor and go right outside that back door, I've got one more surprise for you guys. Could you tell Pamela that it's time? And now for the final award of the evening. I would like to bring back up to the stage the founder of the Space Frontier Foundation, Rick Tomlinson.
Stop meeting like this. It's so cool. I have a mission patch from Moon, man. It's awesome. It's so neat. I live for that stuff. Oh God, I love this award. It's where the rubber hits the road. We won't be able to use that term pretty soon, will we? So, anyway, Robert Heinlein. Speaking of which, I had a saying, and I'm going to paraphrase. I'm one of these guys who can never quote, but I paraphrase, which drove my Monty Python friends crazy. But basically, I think he said 100 miles up and you're halfway to anywhere. And, it's that first 100 miles that we got to make. My heroes are the people that are actually trying to do it. I could almost rationalize my entire life in this cause by just being able to hang out with the doers, the people that are making it happen, with the people that win this kind of an award. It is an exciting time to be alive. I think it's an amazing place for us to be right now. And I've said some of this before, repetition. I used to always try and say something new all the time, and then somebody pointed out that Martin Luther King gave that speech like 100 times before. And and basically I have burned brain out, so I'll just repeat myself a little. This is the time in history that we both have the ability, and Art alluded to this, to destroy ourselves through our technological growth, our civilization's growth, and by retooling and reusing the almost exact same technologies to break out of the cradle and expand civilization endlessly into the open frontier of space. At one and the same time. Coincidence? I don't know. But it's an amazing and exciting time to be alive. And we're it. And the people in this room are the fulcrum point. They talk about tipping points. We are it. The people in this room and our friends and associates that are out working right now, bending metal, making things happen, up all night drafting business plans, sitting in bars trying to get people to invest in those business plans, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's us. We are it. We are Apollo's children. We are no longer orphans. We are the parents of the future. And that's you guys. That is you guys. And I am so honored to be amongst you. And I am so honored to be amongst the people that actually make this happen. I want to show something. One of the things we're working on, my partners are here, by the way, from NewSpace, because we believe a movement needs to have good propaganda. And my two partners here, Kyle and Ryan, we did the poster and all of that kind of thing. Ryan designed that wonderful work. We decided to go out because, again, we want to honor these people and tell this story. And just real quick, I want to give you a clip of a show that we're pitching with some partners. Can I say who they are? No, we'll keep that private. But we have some partners. This is their business. I will tell you this. We're pitching this show, and everything you've ever seen on Curb Your Enthusiasm or any of those shows about TV producers is absolutely true and more. This podium is smarter than most of Hollywood combined. You know that. Yeah. Been there, done that, right? So anyway, I just want to show this clip as a precursor generally of a show we're working on to tell the real story of NewSpace. And one of tonight's winners is actually one of the featured teams. It's sort of Ice Road Truckers meets Building Choppers meets Deadliest Catch, that kind of thing. That's how you have to speak in Hollywood, right? Grand concept. Say it in one sentence. I actually tried to make a pitch longer than that, and one of my buddies, who was a showrunner, as they call him, said, "Shut up." I said, "Well, in space, you're actually supposed to prove the point." No, in Hollywood, you shut up so they can't catch anything that confuses them. Anyway, the point is, this show is about these people, and our job is to aim a looking glass and aim a lens at our people in this cause. So if I could have the trailer. This show is called Space Race. It's just a short 90-second, what we call sizzle reel. NewSpace and our partners are producing the show.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Startups to established leaders, we will work with a growing array of private companies competing to design and build and launch new means of carrying people and materials out of our atmosphere. The space race will once more inspire wonder in a new generation, sparking passions and launching careers, reaching for new heights, stretching beyond what previously did not seem possible.
We distinguish ourselves by accomplishing what we try to do. We play to win.
Jeff is the super genius. Dan is the fantastic engineer. Doug's a rocket whisperer, and I'm Mom.
3, 2, 1.
We're a small R&D shop, and we build computer-controlled rocket ships. They're very unnatural-looking rockets. These are really just the incremental steps that take us to the real goal, which is people in outer space in orbit.
That goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Capture 1/10,000th of the excitement of the reality of what people like the winner of this award create for us. This should be fun. And folks, it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. The award this year for Vision to Reality goes to Masten Space Systems. The reason we're giving them an award, and I gotta tell you, it's interesting because you never discount people in this field. You got to be careful who you discount or you don't notice or whatever. I remember even within the microcosm of our microcosm in this field, you know, at first to me, I knew different players and I was, well, there's Route 10 and there's X-Core and there's Armadillo, and then coming up the side comes Masten. And it's amazing. And so this last year in 2009, and one of the reasons we're recognizing this team, was that they won the Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander Challenge with a nearly perfect flight of the Zoe vehicle. And I have to tell you, it's just an amazing honor for me because we have the CEO and founder of Masten Space Systems here. Sir, Dave Masten.
I think I got something in my eye there. In a way, I guess I want to sort of look more to the future than the past in my comments. I'm a little bit embarrassed. I mean, the award is called Vision to Reality. While this has been a great stepping stone, what we've done in the past year as Masten Space Systems, it's not really the vision yet. It's just one small step towards the vision. So we're not anywhere as close to having the vision to reality part done yet. We have a long way to go. I will consider myself lucky if on my deathbed we're 99% of the way or 90% of the way towards that vision. And that vision is when an 8-year-old girl asks her parents if she can go on vacation to the moon this year. And her parents, later on, after she's in bed, talk about it a little bit and say, you know, I think we can afford to do that. Now, there's a lot more than what Masten Space Systems could possibly do to get there. I mean, we still have a lot of things to work out in terms of physiology of being in space. So we don't even know yet. You know, we basically have a very small set of data points of non-1G on what happens to the human body, and those are all 0G, and a couple of days of 1/6G. What happens when it's, you know, weeks of 1/6G or years of 1/6G. So there's a lot more work. But what Masten Space Systems is trying to do is create the transportation system. Right before the Lunar Lander Challenge competition, before our flights, Alan Boyle of MSNBC called me up and wanted to do a little interview. And his last question was, what is the ultimate goal for Masten Space Systems? And I said, only half jokingly, solar system domination. We do. We want to have, we want to have Masten Space Systems spacecraft and launch vehicles at the spaceports here on the ground on Earth. in low Earth orbit, docked to the propellant depots, at the propellant depots and stations at all the Lagrange points, on the surface of the moon, on the surface of Mars, and who knows how many asteroids that we can get to. So we've made the first tiny baby step. We've got a vehicle that can actually do something. We're actually rebuilding it. As many of you know, it was a bit of a drama going through that winning the Lunar Lander Challenge. Several days of the vehicle not quite working, and then at the end a major problem with the propellant tank. But I want to thank everybody that helped out on that, because what was I going to say about that? But anyway, we had a number of actually our competitors in the Lunar Lander Challenge from 2 other teams actually came down to watch it and ended up staying up all night helping us fix the vehicle while the flight crew went home and got a bit of rest. So that they could, we could actually get a little bit of sleep and be sharp and not miss all the checklist items as we're trying to fly the vehicle. So, and also a couple of our neighbors came by to help, and a lot of that is what we think makes this whole community so great. We may be competitors, but we're also friends, and in the end, we're all going after the same thing. We all know that, and we're going to make it happen. So that's where we are. We're going to go out there and let's conquer space. And long live the revolution.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the evening, but please stand up, raise your glasses, and let's toast to the future of NewSpace. Hear, hear. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending the 2010 NewSpace Awards banquet. We're going to be going upstairs and continuing this party upstairs where it was last night and the night before. Domain Suite 301. See you there. Thank you.
This is exciting.
Technology!
Ladies and gentlemen, Big Miles is watching you. Hey, Miles, can you see the audience? I'm using a compact that I borrowed from a young lady.
Hey, everybody.
All right. So there they are. It's like looking through the Soyuz port, right? All right.
How's the food?
Bit rubbery is the report that I heard. All right, so Miles, let me say some nice things about you. Just sit there and look pretty, you know. So I first met this character in a space context. I met him at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, that little, you know, room with the blue curtain, that damn blue curtain where America's best and brightest and smartest and most interesting people are made to sit there very stiffly by NASA PAO. I mean, you know, heaven forbid, like the CDR should have an opinion about the mission that he's going to fly or she's going to fly. So it was clear to me at that very moment that Miles was a kindred spirit with us here in the foundation. It was pretty obvious that Miles was there, and in fact I was there, not because our respective media organizations, in his case CNN, in my case Sci-Fi Channel, really wanted us to be there covering it. We were there because we were really...
So I just want to say hi. I'm James Pura. I am... Thank you. Thank you. I hope you're all having a good time at the conference so far. Welcome to the NewSpace 2010 Awards Gala. As I said, my name is James Pura, and I'm the Assistant Conference Chair of this year's conference. I hope you've enjoyed the programming so far. Me and the rest of the team, including Ryan McClinko and NASA Ames' own Bruce Pittman, yes, please. We've really tried to push the limits and get you the best programming that anyone's ever seen at this conference so far, or at any conference. Ever, of all time. Some speakers are old, some speakers are new. Oh wait, I don't mean old, I mean you've heard from them before. But either way, I hope it's been enjoyable. I hope you've all also taken notice of the representation at this year's conference from the younger generation. If not, take a look at the room around you now. You know, this NewSpace thing has really struck a chord in the hearts and minds of the best and brightest of the next generation of space nerds. So I would like to encourage all of you for the rest of this conference, if you find yourself standing next to a younger person and their eyes are glazed over with bewilderment but enthusiasm, you know, start a conversation with them. Tell them a story that maybe they've never heard before. I promise they'll enjoy it. I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsors, for without their help, we wouldn't be here. I'd like to thank first and foremost NASA. Yes, yes, and more specifically NASA Ames Research Center. Boeing has also been a support for us for many years, so I'd like to thank them as well for their continued support. Isle of Man has also been one of our strongest, most consistent supporters and has shared our vision for a while now, so thank you. I'd also like to thank Dynetics, Ecliptic, SpaceWorks Commercial, Mass and Space Systems, SEDS, National Space Society, Space.com, Space Vidcast, Space News, and InSpace Media. You see in the theme here? So without further ado, I'd like to bring up the person who will introduce our first award, the NewSpace Journalism Award. Dave Brody is executive producer at Space.com and its parent company, Tech Media Network. He's a career television documentarian, science reporter, and technology commentator. And Dave's an advocate of the Space Frontier Foundation as well. Here to present tonight's award for NewSpace Journalism, Dave Brody.
Thank you, James. We've got some media that we want to set up for you. So I will call upon my media friends in the back to come and help me boot this up.
Apparently, I'm one of those old guys that he talked about. So I'll just sit here in the corner being very quiet. You won't hear a thing from me. Nothing, I promise.
And while we set this up, I'm trying to picture what bewilderment plus enthusiasm looks like. Is that about it? Is that what you were thinking, James? I don't know any. You know some jokes? So I'll tell you what we're trying to do here. Your NewSpace Journalism Award winner tonight is Miles O'Brien. He doesn't know that we've secretly put rocket fuel in his coffee. He, of course, is, as looking around the room, he's not with us tonight. He is in rural Georgia, in what he calls deliverance country, at his lake home, and we're going to try and Skype him in. So that's what's going on here. I'm going to let you do the honors.
All right, let's.
Hopefully we won't catch him, you know, in an awkward moment at his lake house in deliverance country. That would be a freeze of Miles O'Brien earlier in the day, because it's the middle of the night in deliverance country. It's Miles at the lake. Okay, well, so far this is working about as well as dessert. Nicely done. Did everyone hear the gentleman? Oh, well. Yes, we're pinging you. Do you see us? Ladies and gentlemen, Miles says, "My bad." Yeah, stand by. Call someone else. That's right. Uh-oh. Let's try one more time. Into the subject, like space was, I don't know, important. So speaking of CNN, Miles was on air for 17 years there, eventually becoming the chief technology and environment talent. And in my humble opinion, CNN has no idea what they gave up when they gave up Miles O'Brien. But the good news is mainstream media's loss is our gain, because for the last several months, Miles, along with Stephen Young at Spaceflight Now and his team, with a little bit of help from space.com, has been producing this labor of love and personal passion that they call This Week in Space, and I encourage you to check it out wherever you can find it. Yes, it's on space.com, but it's also at spaceflightnow.com. It's on YouTube. Just Google it. It will come up. So, and one of the things, when This Week in Space is at its best, and this is just my personal opinion, Miles, it's when you're covering the cool, disruptive stuff that is done in the private commercial space sector. So, Miles, for your unmatched, insightful reporting on the new space industry and the old space industry, we of the Space Frontier Foundation are honored and pleased to present you with the 2010 NewSpace Journalism Award. I'll show it to you, and then please talk to our folks here.
You like me. So, thank you 1,000 times. Thank you. You know, it's been a wild ride for me since I left that big mainstream media network that I work for. You know, it's interesting. I've always I've had such a passion for this subject, and for the longest time, I spent most of my time trying to convince the gatekeepers at CNN to allow me to tell the story a little more than they really wanted to hear it. Basically, they would send me down to the Cape to cover what I call death watch journalism, just to be there just in case it blows up. And it really didn't matter to them what the mission was all about and what the crew was doing. And that was eternally frustrating to me. So, you know, when I left, when they shoved me out the door at CNN, actually,